Welcome. I'm Kat Dodds, and I'm with Cool.World, and we are now at the panel 5 of our 6-panel salon series. This is Legalize Compassion, a digital curriculum for harm reduction awareness, plus screening of Bevel Up. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that we are on the stolen and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples, also known as Vancouver. And in these particular times, I want to not just give lip service to that, but say that it's quite important that we acknowledge that this is unceded territory, and we are here not even as guests necessarily, but as occupiers. And that I think the issue of this fact is actually one of the contributing pieces to why we need to be talking about harm reduction and many of the topics of today's webinar. So welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. We have joining us filmmaker Nettie Wild and nurse and activist Caroline Brunt, who was one of the street nurses in Bevel Up, and also Yasmin Windsor, who is a harm reduction activist nurse right now working at street level in Vancouver in the downtown east side. And are they all there? Hello, everyone.
Hi there, Kat.
Hi.
So we want to say at the top that this is going to be a panel-style presentation and conversational. So that means that panelists are also free to ask each other questions and fill out details. I'm going to lead it off with a few more detailed introductions and specific questions for each one of the panelists. But I also want to encourage all of our watchers out there on the various streams in the virtual universe that we're in to give us your questions, because we definitely want this to be interactive if at all possible. And we're welcome your comments and what you want to talk about. So I'm going to start with also acknowledging too that the film is streaming off our webpage. If you registered, you would have gotten a link to it. And I just checked, and I think 28 people have been watching it to date. And if you have not yet seen Bevel Up, you have till midnight tonight to watch it on our page. You have all the time in the world to watch it on the NFB, where it also lives. And on that note, I want to start with you, Nettie, and I'll just give a little further introduction to Nettie. Nettie is one of Canada's leading documentary filmmakers. She is the director of Bevel Up. I just want to give a quick shout out to her current project, Uninterrupted, which has a VR incarnation of what was an incredible public art installation a few years ago and is turning into a different version of that now. So that's really exciting. And the question I wanted to start with you with, Nettie, with regards to the topic of today and what we're up to, is just looking back at making a Bevel Up. You said to me in a conversation that you thought this was your only activist film, and I thought that was particularly interesting considering you're considered an activist filmmaker. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how Bevel Up came to be from your perspective.
Yeah, with Bevel Up's is the only film where I was basically working for someone else, and really happy to do so, because that someone else was this extraordinary street nurse team of the BC Centre for Disease Control. So what that meant is that when we were shooting, I was turning to the street nurses and going, "Have we got what you want? Have we got it? Have we got it?" I've never done that before in my life. I've never turned to somebody else ask them. And that's why I'm not an activist filmmaker, except with Bevel Up. In all my other films, I've gone in and looked at complex issues with many, many different points of view. People have been graciously allowed me to film their stories, and then I've gone into the editing room and created a piece, and I couldn't have all the different angles of the story in the editing room with me, so they weren't a part of the editing process. Again, not only when we were shooting with the street nurses, but in the editing room and the cuts, I was saying, "Have we got what you want? Are we on track here?" And that was really different from me. And I got to say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And all my other films, virtually all of them, with the exception of The Fish, I guess, there are activists at the core of the stories that I film. But in terms of my role, this is very different. And as I say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually got a street nurse bag at the end of it, but it didn't say street nurse on it. It just said filmmaker. But I like that. I like that sense of being embedded in the street, in the most happening street nurse team on the planet.
Another thing I want to say before we move on to talk to Caroline was one of the things that you kept correcting me with over time, and a little bit of context is we didn't work on Bevel Up when it first came out, but about a year after it came out, my team, and those who are behind the scenes, actually, David Eng and Sandy Haxey, we were part of doing some outreach for the BC CDC through working with the film. But every time I talked to you, Nettie, you said, it's not a film, it's a 45-minute documentary and 2.5 hours of teaching. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, again, it's a different animal. You know, we created something which at that time, when we first made it, which would be 2005, right? 2007. The web and storytelling on the web was really coming into its own. And so we created a piece that allowed the 45-minute film to just be, allowed me as a filmmaker to put my camera on the shoulders of the street nurses and to go with them. We didn't have to cut to this expert and that expert to explain whether that expert was someone who uses drugs or whether it's a doctor out at UBC. We just stayed with the nurses in this cinema verite way and created this, what I think were really compelling stories in terms of the movie. But what we did was we chaptered it. And so after each story, it's possible for you to, because of the wonders of the digital world, rather than a straight ahead film, you're able to go into menus and find the street nurses themselves digging into the complexities and the prickly points that you actually see them having to deal with in the film, or cut to a lawyer who talks about the legal ramifications, or a peer talking about what it was like from his or her end of the binoculars to be dealing with the street nurse team. All these various different experts, of which there are 3.5 hours in nice, digestible 3 to 5 minute bites. And so this makes it really different, and I think is the real strength of Bevel Up. So for viewers who are looking at this, don't just stop at the 45 minutes. Drill into the various different components, because there's incredible nuggets in there that that make the whole piece really a mini curriculum. That's what we were developing. Mm-hmm. Make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's a good segue into to talking to Caroline about the curriculum. But why don't we start with the clip we have, one of the clips that we created for social media. So just like there were all these short digestible bites created for the film, now we have 30-second, hors d'oeuvres that contextualized for the very fast-paced social media environment they have to live in if we're going to get them out there. Sorry, David, behind the scenes, can you play one of the videos? I'm not sure how to do that.
I think the rest of us are really glad we're not doing this part.
You need to create a respectful and trusting relationship. Without it, you can't deliver healthcare.
You have to be really careful if you're using it that you don't use too much, because then you can just nod off.
Awesome. So, Caroline, talk to us a bit about why, after all these years, you're still at it with Bevel Up now as an educator, not on the street as a nurse.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Kat, and thanks, Nettie. I think you kind of laid the ground floor there as to why we're here. There is, everybody since we made this back in 2007 has only really looked at the 45-minute documentary. And as Nettie said, there's another 3.5 hours behind that. And there's so much richness in there. There's so many interviews. We connect what we did in the 45 minutes with interviews from a nurse ethicist and a nurse practice consultant. We had peers on the street talk to their lived experience. We had nurses in the film talk about how it felt for them to find Becky, or how it felt for them to work with youth. So really there's richness there. And in that richness, there is all the topics that are relevant and current today. It's like as if, in 2007, that we talked about stigma, we talked about discrimination, we talked about racism, we talked about the need to show compassion to people who use drugs and to care. And to really reflect on where we come from as a society, as nurses, that we do come with stigma and discrimination and racism, and what we can do with that, and what we need to kind of do moving forward. So hence the lessons, right? And hence the fact that now we've put it in a format that anyone can really use. And really there's 18 topics you can choose from, and an educator, even if they're in nursing or sociology or in a nonprofit organization, can carry into a classroom or in a boardroom or wherever and teach about a topic. And more so, Bevel Up was created for dialogue, which is in essence what we're doing right now, Kat. And we created this to have a discussion. We created this because there was nothing in curriculum at the time that really talked to how we deliver care to people who use drugs, work in the sex trade, etc., and the language we used. And so we were part of many people out there trying to figure this out and trying to get a discussion going. We can't hear you, Kat. I can't hear you.
We've had a question from someone out there, Stephanie, how can I get the 3.5 hours of curriculum? So the answer to that is you can go to the NFB site, where all of that is on the Bevel Up, their Bevel Up section. I think we need to put the link, that's the Facebook, yeah, the NFB. Do we have the link for the NFB Bevel Up? It should be in there somewhere. I'll find it. But you can also get it by following the links from bevelupoutreach.com, which we're going to go to shortly and show you, because it's also, a lot of these clips are also within the curriculum that Caroline can show you now if we take you to Bevel Up Outreach.
Sure.
Yeah.
David, are you there? Can we bring up Bevel Up Outreach and we'll show you what we've created?
Mm-hmm. There we are.
So if we go, I hope everybody can see, if we go into preview curriculum, and I used this the other day with some students in the city here, we have an overview and watch Bevel Up section. So if you scroll down, please, David, or up, oh, goodness, yeah, keep going. Keep going. And here we come to, okay, stop. Go up, go back a bit. Go back. There we go. So we've got an overview and watch Bevel Up in the initial beginning there, and now we have lunchbox lessons. And there's many different topics. So depending if you're in the School of Nursing in the practical nurse program, or you're in the Bachelor of Science program, or in your healthcare aid, or maybe you're in sociology. We didn't really make it all towards nursing. The language in it is for everybody that wants to learn about the many different topics we have here, depending on where they work. So for example, let's what I taught the other day was pregnancy, substance use, and sex work. So if we can go into that, David, thank you very much. And really, this is so simple, because as many of you don't know or know, I'm no technological geek, and so it's like I'm terrible at this stuff. And so it's just got to be so simple. And I want to thank Elaine Jones for really helping with the editing here, because she is the guru and was in Bevel Up originally. So what we have here is a topic: pregnancy, substance use, and sex work. We have a learning goal, right? And then if we keep scrolling up there, David, we have key questions and activities to think through before, during, and after watching Bevel Up. And again, Bevel Up was made because people were coming to us in the street nurse team, and we're asking nurses all over the country, many different people actually say, well, how do you connect with people, right? And so it did ask people to reflect on their own stigma and discrimination. And a lot of the key questions and activities that we have are really around reflection and discussion, right? So when you see a pregnant person using substances, what comes up for you, right? And then if we move down, in the Bevel Up additional footage and interviews, that is what Nettie was talking about, and the richness of her team. And not only did we have the 45 documentary that showed all the stories and followed the nurses and the people in the film and their intricate lives and the issues they have to deal with, but we had the 3.5 hours of footage underneath, right? So here we are. We have pulled from the reflections on practice, from the chapters, from the topics, key learning bites, and people who back then were experts in the delivery of care to people who were pregnant. So if you here we have Sarah Payne, right, First Square, and she helped set up First Square, and she helped set up Sheway. So she talks about the myths of drug use and the effects on the pregnant woman. These clips are not very long, right? So literally all the lessons and the topics you could it's an hour and a half, right? Maybe less, depending on how much footage you want to use. If you click on the arrow there, David, to the right, we have another reflections and practice, me reflecting on the complexity and what goes through my mind. I'm worried about the baby. I'm worried about the mother, or the first thing I think about is the mother and not the baby, or the baby, right? So all of these reflections and issues we heard nurses come up with all the time, right? And so we just wanted to put it front and center, to have dialogue, to say and understand that many in healthcare have not had education in reaching people and delivering care to people where they're at who use substances. So we can go to that right button again, and I think there's one more clip in this segment. We talk about fetal alcohol. And to continue, David. So you have many different segments to choose from. So continue is further discussion questions, right? Further discussion questions. Depends what class you're teaching. I've taught health law for the BSN program, so we're going to talk about legalities of substance use in pregnancy, right? So it depends where you're at, and you have some links in there that go towards the Nurses Protective Society, for this instance, the Center of Excellence for Women's Health. And then if you go down further, news, research, articles, and websites are separated into news articles, current ones from different newspapers, mostly Vancouver. So it's a mixture of newspaper articles, it's a mixture of research articles, and then you have websites. And they're split into government, nursing, and non-government. Understanding that how we care for people who use substances is not only delivered by healthcare, it's also delivered by other organizations, and acknowledging them and the work that they do. And we will be able to, every 2 or 3 months, update the news and the articles or the websites to include other organizations as well. So if you feel we haven't included you and you want to be included, please send me an email or Kat an email, right? So it really is quite different. It's not a standalone curriculum. It is that if you are teaching something on health promotion or harm reduction or pregnancy and substance use, you can maybe take a segment of what we've created right now and take it into your classroom or wherever you are teaching it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. That's awesome. And as you can see, there's a lot of material there, but it's all there, able to be scanned through and picked in a way that works for whoever is using the resource. So that's really exciting. And as she said, part of the reason we're doing all this is so that we can have a venue to keep updating the relevance of the material in terms of connecting it to resources or connecting it to current events. And on that note, one of the things I just want to mention before we move on to let Yasmin have some airtime is the last point, which Caroline, you raised when we started this project right now, this relaunch project, which was that there was a recent study in a nursing journal that you found particularly poignant because it said that recent findings pertaining to substance use education in Canadian nursing programs finds that students do not feel or knowledgeable or prepared to provide care to people who use illegal substances. So can you comment a bit about that and why it's important that we contribute to, changing that? And to those who want to know more about that too, the links to this are on the blog on bevelupoutreach.com.
Yeah. When we made Bevel Up originally, we did a little survey and an assessment and sent a letter out to nursing schools and asked them how much was in curriculum for students in education around how you deliver health, etc., to people who use drugs. And there was hardly anything happening, hardly any time given towards educating students. So last year, where are we? 2021, right? So in 2020, there was an article that came out, Mary Lou Gagnon, Bernie Polly, of whom many of us know, and are gurus in nursing around harm reduction, etc., and have done a lot of work with working with people who use drugs. Did some research and sent towards students, Canadian nursing programs, a student survey, right? And still their findings were that many students are still only getting 1 to 5 hours in the whole of their education towards this topic. Now, understanding that, having talked to many students, and I'm sure people in the audience right now know that students are coming across people who use drugs a lot more frequently than they used to. So hence the push to do this project in how can we, knowing we have 4 hours of Bevel Up and the richness in the other 3 hours that many people don't use, how can we use that and how can we give it to educators so that they can create dialogue wherever they are, right? So we still have a ways to go, but as I talked about before, we are one tool in the toolbox that educators can use also to talk about this topic.
Awesome. Okay. So that's a good segue to move on to ask Yasmin to tell us a bit more about the work that she does, and in particular, focusing on with the opioid poisoning crisis that's going on right now, how much more important is it that we, take this toolbox and use it out there? And I think your mic is off, so turn your mic on, Yasmin.
Well, last year there was 1,716 deaths due to the current crisis that we're in, the poisoning of the drug supply. And I was just reading in the BCNU magazine, there's a really great article in there that it is the #1 health crisis in BC right now. So that in and of itself kind of tells us that we as nurses especially need to be educated. And oftentimes people who do use substances that are considered illegal, they hide it because there's such a great deal of shame, and if they perceive any kind of judgment from their healthcare providers, they're not going to disclose if they're using or not. And so if they're not disclosing, it doesn't give the healthcare provider, nurses, physicians any opportunity to, offer Narcan kits, offer, safe supply. So it increases their risk of dying. So, I mean, it's a huge issue right now in BC, and the numbers have gone up 75% since the COVID restrictions, because initially when, COVID hit, we were all terrified. So needle exchanges shut down, safe injection sites shut down. So people developed different habits, which put them at risk for overdosing. Also the increased loneliness and isolation, so it's all increased right now. 2 months ago, they had the highest number of overdose deaths in BC. I think it was 176 people. That's 5 young people dying a day of overdose deaths that we don't hear about. It hits the media every now and again, but it certainly doesn't hit, it doesn't hit the front pages. So as a healthcare provider, as a nurse who's still working here, it's pretty sad and it's distressing, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement to change it. And also it's affecting Indigenous people at a far higher rate than non-Indigenous people. So if nurses aren't educated and they don't know to ask the questions, or, they have judgments, then that's going to have a huge impact on people's lives.
Yeah, and there's been some very recent reports too on the impacts of racism in healthcare that have been quite damning. Is that something you could speak about at all? I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot with that, but.
Well, I feel like our healthcare system is a colonial system. It's based on a colonial model. It's not, it doesn't take into account people's culture. And I think especially with our Indigenous people, there's been centuries of abuse within the healthcare system towards them. I was just reading recently what happened in residential schools to children around healthcare, and children being restrained for days on end and experimented on, and that's the system that we work in. And when you're working with Indigenous people, there's huge amounts of distrust towards healthcare providers. So they're not going to open up, especially if we're telling them what to do, and if we're judging them based on their appearance or their lifestyle. The walls go up, and it doesn't take a lot to connect with somebody. It takes kindness and it takes compassion, and a bit of sense of humor. But sometimes as nurses, we're so busy, right? We want to get all our tasks done. So we forget about the person that's in front of us. And that has a huge impact. And we're in positions of entitled power, working, on stolen lands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read a couple of years ago, actually before COVID, an article by an Indigenous reporter, Chantal Bell-Richard, who said that we shouldn't be calling it the opioid crisis. We should be calling it the colonization crisis.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to just actually go in and put a few of the comments. There's been a few people commenting in the chats. One of the things we do when we're doing this on StreamYard is we end up getting chats coming from different places, comments coming from different places. So Denise says, these resources are so vital. Thank you so much for this work. She asks, from the street nurse's perspective, is the FUR program openly received and accessed by those who could benefit from it? Sorry, I don't know what the FUR program is. Street nurse.
It's the unit at BC Women's. It's a locked unit at BC Women's for women who are pregnant who use substances. Is it openly received? I think I'm not the best person to ask. I think you would have to ask the women who are on the unit. I've had a number of women that I've worked with who are pregnant, Indigenous women, who have been there. Some have had really positive experiences. Others have experienced a lot of discrimination and judgment towards them. So, and it's because I think it's the individual nurses, and I don't know. I really do feel that they do the best that they can, but I feel like we can always do better when we're working with people who use substances and women who are pregnant and Indigenous women.
Nettie, your mic is not on?
Oh, I thought you were turning us off and on. Sorry.
No.
Oh, sorry. So it's families in recovery, not the FUR unit. Sorry.
Thanks, Denise. Nettie, go ahead. Oh,
you're muted, Nettie.
You keep muting.
You're muting yourself.
Ah, there we are.
Okay.
There you go.
So what Yasmin was saying speaks really directly to getting healthcare professionals, nurses, and others educated.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a case in point. You've got people, obviously, you'd have staff at FUR who would be there because they were compelled in some way to deal with moms who are dealing with substances. And at the same time, even within that, you've got assumptions coming into play, and that I would hope that Bevel Up and the new work that Caroline's done around the classroom curriculum can really help people address that.
I think just to add to Yasmin and Nettie there, I think, research showed before Bevel Up, before anybody put any education together, that healthcare has a very, very healthy stigma and discrimination or racism towards different populations. So it's just looking at that, it's just accepting it and understanding that we all come from society, which is who are quite stigmatized. And just because you walk in and want to be a nurse or a doctor, it doesn't mean to say you leave that stigma and discrimination, at the doorstep. You don't. None of us do. And so how we untangle that is through education. And wherever you are in nursing or sociology, I keep mentioning sociology. I love sociology. I wanted to be a sociologist anyways. So, it's like wherever you are, it's like, let's have a discussion. Let's be brave enough to say, you know what? I do have stigma. I do have discrimination. I do have judgment, but my professional practices and my hat says that I shouldn't. So let's undo that, because we know stigma kills, right? Let's discuss it in the classroom, or discuss it in the nursing units, or wherever we are, and say, you know what? Okay, what we're recognizing here is stigma. What shall we do? How can we deal with it? And not do it alone. Have the peers help us, right? So much talent everywhere, and different people can be at the table to help healthcare and help whoever needs it to unravel the situation, right? Yeah.
This reminds me of the very first day that I was in the downtown east side as a filmmaker, as opposed to just a resident in Vancouver. And an activist, a very, very good street level activist, turned to me and she said, yeah, you want to do this film? Great. But don't come down here to save people. Don't be so arrogant as to think that you can save people. And you know what? I had no idea what she was talking about. In my head, I'm going, well, why not? Why? That sounds like a good thing to do. Well, the arrogance and the assumptions that comes with that point of view, I think is shared by many. And
No one needs saving. We need care, and we need compassion. We need compassion. We need to accept the person where they're at. We need to accept the student where they're at, and where do we go from there, right? So,
and you're not wearing a white hat and charging down with some kind of solution. I think we see that a lot with healthcare professionals, with policing, with a lot of stuff. People, well-meaning people who are just coming from such a wacko point of view. And so then when the people on the receiving end, they can sense it in a heartbeat. And that's not an equal relationship. That is not, that's not a street nurse on her knees saying, what can we do here? How can I help you? That's a very, very different point of view.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues too is that we've sort of criminalized the very conditions that are putting people at risk. Like we've criminalized poverty. We haven't fully criminalized drugs, because if you're not poor and not marginalized, you can get away with it. Like it's not a risk to your health in the same way as it is to be stigmatized at every level of care. And so there is this inequity built in even to who is stigmatized for frankly the same behavior. And that's one of at the core of the inequities. So this is why it's really important to also hear from drug user advocacy peer groups, because the point is this is one of the reasons we've chosen this Legalize Compassion. It's like there's an absolute need, in my opinion, to stop putting the barriers up to people getting whatever it is they need, whether that's safe supply, whether that's just non-stigmatized healthcare of any kind when they need it. So I just wanted to throw that out as my thought, as not someone who works as a nurse, but who's worked around both nurses and peers and other types of educators in this area.
And as Yasmin said, it's creating an atmosphere, a different atmosphere, right? Where people can access health and walk in, and it doesn't seem like health. Right. And it's acceptance, and it's accepting. I mean, we're trained in abstinence and have been very, very well for years. And also healthcare has come from a place. They had a model of care at one point of blaming the victim. So we have to look at our history in all of this, right? And work together in acknowledging history, acknowledging our role, and acknowledging the labels that we use to discriminate, and then kind of move forward with the help of peers in how we can do things differently, even setting up places where people meet healthcare. What does that look like? So there's a lot of work to do, and I know there's a lot of people out there that are actually doing it. Absolutely. But from the educational perspective, the next set of healthcare professionals we need to have the conversations in the classroom, and the difficult conversations, and we need to be respectful of all the students that we have, because also they come with history, and also the instructors come with history, right? So really acknowledging and being present and accepting. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories about making Bevel Up is that we've spent a very long time in a room with lists on the wall trying to figure out what the heck the street nurses wanted to do. And there were I'd say, well, we could open up your street nurse bag and you could take out various different things that you work with and explain how you work with them. No, that wasn't it. And we went on and on and on until finally I'm going, well, what is it? And finally I realized that what all those lists on the wall were about, and what this extraordinary group of nurses, women and men, were trying to tell me, is that my job was to somehow capture with our camera what non-judgmental, or an attempt at non-judgmental healthcare looks like. And that's what I think that Bevel Up can contribute to the classroom. And then you have all these various other people, pulling it apart, because the street nurses on the screen, they're not saints. This is not a special kind of breed of person that is a street nurse, because that in and of itself is weird when you think about it, right? It's something that can be learned and taught. And, if you're in a situation where you've got two people who need healthcare and they're under a trailer and they're on the brink of dying, what do you do? And how do you get them to buy into that process? Because they're under that trailer for a reason. They've just gotten kicked out of Emerge. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
They weren't born to be under a trailer. Society basically put them there. So, we end up looking at, in that particular case, Carolyn and another fabulous nurse doing the work of medical work, social work, and their own personal work. It was, yeah.
We have another question from Denise. Is there a governing body, provincially or nationally, that makes the decisions to what the curriculum content for new nurses is? And is trauma-informed training currently part of it?
Yeah. Trauma-informed training is smack in there. Healing-centered care is smack in there more than ever before. And I think we have a bunch of students on live right now who can chirp to that. And we have a few heads of department that can talk to, what goes into curriculum. And that is discussed at a provincial level, in my understanding, but someone may be able to tell me differently. It's not like we haven't been teaching harm reduction and some of this content. It just needs to be more, because there's only 1 to 5 hours, according to the research done from Mary Lou Gagnon and Kimberly Wilbur, who's an awesome nurse over on the East Coast there, Bernie Polly, Dominique Denise Lalonde, Elaine Payne, right? There's a whole band of people across the country that are trying to kind of push a little bit more and to hope that we can get it, like a textbook that's acknowledged that it's going to stay and you have to teach from it. And for sure there's other models and other documentaries out there, etc., but it may be a start, right? And I think there was a few comments from a person called Tree, which we missed. Anyways, Tree. And I think Yasmin. You're gonna have to stop me now. I'm on a rant. Tree just knocked the nail on the head. Too many professionals feel uncomfortable, so that's why it's really important. Now, what nursing has done over the years is amazing. Is that they've created placements out in organizations that help and serve people who use drugs. And what I hear from students the most is it's not necessarily the documentary that they see, or sometimes, or it's not necessarily the book that they read or the lesson plan that they've had. It's the conversation with individuals. It's the human connection to know that the people who use drugs are no different largely to them themselves, right? So yes, we all, what did we say when oh, I don't know, when your mother said don't do it, what did you do? You did it, right? So I don't know where I'm going with that. Anyways, I forgot. But it's true. It's the human connection. If we can get the human connection, because in nursing we're task focused. We have to be. We have a job to do, but the task is not a null and void from the communication. Because in communication, then you tackle the stigma and the discrimination, and you allow that person to get closer. And then you work and you advocate. And then you work with nonprofit organizations who do a fantastic job out there.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just looking. We've had a backlog of a few comments that aren't exactly questions, but we could put them up just to kind of get the interaction. People have been interacting. This is actually more interactive.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
I'm just going to post this comment because it was a while back, but just so that we see it. Very important to hear that feedback. It's a few minutes ago.
Okay. I could just say, Lani. Lani just commented here, Lani.
Lani?
Yes, and Nettie, please add. I mean, this wouldn't have happened, Lani, if you hadn't called us and really said, I use Bevel Up, right? And it's like, okay, so is there a Bevel Up too? I said, no, right? But what can we do? And we can create lessons. So Lani, we have to blame her for where we are right now, right? And lovingly. It takes an army of people, and there's an army of very committed health professionals as much as any other faculty that are front and center trying to kind of deal with the situation. But what we want to do is we want to legalize compassion. We want to legalize caring. We want to legalize love and acceptance.
We had, I used to call all the healthcare professionals and progressive people who are working within NGOs and, the progressive cops, all those people that you find. When we were rolling out Bevel Up across the country, we referred to them as the harm reduction all-stars, and they're everywhere, but often not supported. So you'll go into small towns or big institutions, and you've got these people who are really burning bright, and they're having one heck of a time. So it's, we featured lots of them in Bevel Up to show people that people like Lani who work in bigger institutions, or Jane McCall when she was working in the Emerge department, going, people tell me that there's not enough time to practice harm reduction in Emerge. Are you kidding? Like, this is the reality I'm dealing with. And it's exciting. And the other thing that my friends used to say, don't you get kind of down about having to deal with this issue and all these people are in these terrible straits? When I was making Bevel Up in another film that we made called Fix, the story of an addicted city. And I said, in fact, it's the opposite, because I feel that we're shining the light on the light at the end of the tunnel, that this is in fact the future. And so, yeah, Lani, you made a little piece of future for us. But she was so insistent. She's going, I need Bevel Up. Where can I find it? I can't find it. At that point, it was languishing in DVD land. And because of her, we're now on the web.
Now we're now digital, kicking and screaming. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Stephanie. Sorry, we're taking over here, Kat.
No, this is fun. We have about 10 minutes left, so I definitely want anyone commenting to be seen/heard and to join the conversation. So, do you want to comment on what Stephanie's saying now?
Yeah, even people with a training in mental health do not want to work with people that are having a drug habit. Well, oh my goodness. What was I? I was sitting with someone yesterday.
Are there any people without a drug habit? In terms of, like,
Is there anyone without any habits?
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And because that's what I was trying to say about the equity issue. It's like, it's arbitrary what's illegal and what's illegal. It's a lot of people who are dying of overdoses are dying of overdoses because of legal drugs that have been overprescribed. That's another issue. But or where the tapering of those drugs has led to a dependency that's caused them to get involved with some sort of illegal version of that drug. This is not about the drug. It's about the trauma, and it's about the need people have, all people, no exceptions, to medicate.
Yeah.
The issue is, are we doing this with good medicine and love and support from our care, the people supposed to be caring, or are we ending up with the medicine that's hurting us?
Yeah. People are just using because they don't want to be in pain. It's just, I made a comment at a meeting once, like, if every fifth bottle of wine was poisoned, how would that be? Like, or I don't know, like, and that's what we're dealing with the fentanyl poison supply. It's anyways, it's so clear to me that we just need to give people fentanyl, like, just like,
it's like
if we give them other, pharmaceutical prescriptions to deal with their aches and pains in their body, or
their trauma.
It seems so simple, yet it's not, for some reason.
Sorry, we're having over facilitation in the back end. That's why things are flashing back and forth. Sorry. So it is a challenge, and I think I can't speak to Newfoundland and Labrador, but this is a challenge, and that's why personally I want to keep saying, challenging people who have an abstinence only point of view to sort of challenge them to think about what that looks like if you're talking about the kind of substances that just don't happen to be illegal, right? We would not allow that as a human right. But the stigma of harm reduction, I think, is what we're kind of, what this is all about when we see these kind of comments.
I think it's closing our hearts to a big group of people. Like,
I also think that when people are really suffering and they're in trouble, they're hard to be with. I mean, I remember one time, one of the characters in another film of ours, who is actually he's in Bevel Up, Earl Crow, gives some very, very interesting insights as a peer. And I remember one time being in a situation where people were talking about this phenomenal work that people like Earl had done in the community. And the child of the daughter of one of the people who uses drugs stood up, and she was trembling with hurt and rage and saying, there's all this talk about the support for the person who uses drugs. What about the families? Like, this person was not there for me in so many ways. And I think, when we talk about, I think we have to deal with complexity here and understand that society has created an outrageous situation, and then people have very, very, trauma has very, very difficult face to deal with. And so people get frightened by it. And then society goes, you're too loud, you're too stinky, you're too rough, you're to get proper health care. So you're not going to get it. So then we're all in a big mess, right? It's very complex. So sometimes compassion, especially for those families, is very, very hard.
Yeah, and that's why we need to be fighting also for safe supply and
absolutely.
Yeah.
And nurses in the emergency ward, right? And
Yeah.
doctors and stuff.
Yeah.
You're dealing with people who are at their wits' end, right? And so that's not easy. It's not an easy thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have another question from Denise. Without invading their privacy, how are Becky and Liz? That's a question for. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they died. Yeah. Liz and Becky died. Becky more recently in the last year or so, and Liz was one of the first fatalities with fentanyl, unfortunately.
Oh, that's tragic.
And I think, if we go back to filming, and Nettie can attest to this, I mean, consent, right? Consent. God. No one did not consent, and everybody wanted the film to happen. And just because they knew the educational kind of behind this, that maybe even if you watch a small segment or all the segments that we put in the lesson plans right now, you will start to change how you feel about people who use drugs and work in the sex trade and who are pregnant and using, right? So when they said make it, and then I used to have Liz call from jail saying, Caroline, I need Bevel Up, right? So that is the legacy of this. Many thought it would be on the shelf. The DVD would be on the shelf within a few years. I always thought, no, it's not going to be, unfortunately. And so we can still play a role in the boardrooms or the classrooms or the clinics or the nonprofit organizations in sharing material that we created a very long time ago to help educate the next generation, and to even help educate the generation of nurses who are my age, etc., who did not have any education at all around how to connect and communicate and show compassion to people who use drugs, right? So we are a generation, I think Yasmin as well, that did not have any education at all. It was extremely difficult. So that, and many people of our age and younger are in the healthcare system or wherever you're at, working in mental health, etc. And so we've got to be compassionate to everyone here, because we did not have education, and we're trying our best. And with more tools that people are producing, we can increase that education in curriculums, and we can begin to have more further dialogue.
And I think even the word compassion, that doesn't mean, what I've learned from you guys is that doesn't mean you just work on yourself and you're a nicer person or you're more open. It's actually stripping away constructs within yourself and within the institution that you work, within your city, within the country, that are working to disempower people. It's very concrete. It's not. It's just not a matter of being determined that you're going to go out and be nicer that day. There's a lot in front of all of us in terms of change, and hopefully Bevel Up helps towards that.
Yeah, and don't do it on your own. Work with others, right? There's a lot of, there's a lot of burnout, and when you work in this area, there is burnout, and it's really hard, as we all know. But know that we're trying to do something from our end in educating the next generation. And I hope that that next generation then takes it into clinics, acute care, long-term care, and educates the next generation and their families, right? So one little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm. There was a very nice experience that Caroline and I had when we went into St. Paul's, and their program, help me, Caroline, what's the name of it? The Urban... What's Scott's program?
Urban
Crosstown.
No.
Urban Health.
Yeah, Urban Health.
Yeah.
And they're right in the heart of a great big hospital.
Yeah.
we saw harm reduction at work, not in every ward. They were kind of chiseling away, making inroads into various different parts of the hospital. But one of the things that was so moving was that we had a meeting at one point. There were 5 people in the meeting, and 4 of them had decided to go into the kind of harm reduction work that they were doing because of the work that they had seen in Bevel Up. And it's that whole speaks to the fact that it's a learned skill, right? And it was really, really inspiring. And in terms of being on our own, you know, I think because the street nurses were really ahead of their time, even making Bevel Up in its own was tough. It was not without pushback way back when. And it was so fulfilling to see this, you know, like 10, 15 years later, that a new generation, that Bevel Up had played its part. And I think will, you know, hopefully will continue to play its part in getting more harm reduction warriors out there.
Yeah, we've actually run out of time. We've gone a little bit over. So I just want to give Yasmin a chance to say any last thoughts you have, and then I'll play the final clip and we'll do our closing comments. But Yasmin, any last thoughts?
I don't think so. I think just stay open, baby steps, you know, just treat people how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, David, in behind the scenes, do you think we could play the last clip? This is one of the other clips we made for social media. Okay. So in terms of those, we're going to keep doing this kind of thing, making short excerpts and posting them. So I just want to say, I'm sorry we've run out of time. Actually, this hour has flown by. So I appreciate all the interaction as well. There's been a lot of amazing interaction. I just want to acknowledge that this webinar series has been produced with the support of the Canada Council for the Arts. We're very grateful for that. We have also it's been co-presented by the BC Nurses Union and the NFB. And I want to also just thank our guests as well. So Nettie and Caroline and Yasmin, thank you for all the work you do and all the ways you do it. We're glad you were here for this. And then I just want to also talk about behind the scenes. We have, I'm sorry, I'm losing my document here. We have behind the scenes, you just mentioned David Eng, Sandy Haxey, Cameron Lee. They've been running the show. In the bigger behind the scenes, I want to also thank Darcy Hamilton for editing our social videos. Melissa James has been producing this series. And our Cool.World partners, David Griffith, Lena Minifee, and Jen Evans. So this is the 5th of our webinars of 6. The next one is next week on the 22nd, which is Drawing Wisdom, Decolonizing Community Filmmaking from Concept to Distribution. So this webinar will be co-presented with Drawing Wisdom and the InSpirit Foundation. And you can register at Cool.World/salon for that one coming up. So once again, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to having you join us for the next one. And thank you for all the people in the comments saying, no, not the end. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
And somebody chimed in from Belgium. That's totally cool.
From Belgium?
Yeah.
Yay. Yay.